I want to ask you to imagine a scenario for me. You were just gravely injured in an accident. Those injuries are potentially fatal. There are 2 doctors available to try to save you. One is paid $100,000 per year. They became a physician to make the world a better place and save people. They are employed by a nonprofit organization who provides emergency physicians to hospitals where those particular medical specialties are least resourced relative to what the local community needs. The other doctor is paid $500,000 per year. He became a doctor to have a high status job and earn a substantial income. He definitely likes to do a good job and certainly wouldn't want to lose his job, but saving you is just another day in the office, not part of some higher calling. If you have time, pause the video and post in the comments which you would choose and why. In the meantime, I can speculate why some of you would choose either to try to save you. The first doctor is appealing because they are very altruistically driven, a hero. They may very well be willing to give their life to save yours if such a trade were possible. However, such a trade is not possible, and what if this person just barely passed medical school? The latter doctor does not actually care about you, but most likely outcompeted 8 other people to get into medical school, to say nothing of their residency program that they completed, and then competing for such a high-paid position. He may not care about you, but a failing reputation or malpractice would put his money and status in danger. The point is, either of these could be equally skilled doctors, but just because the latter is selfishly motivated doesn't mean they aren't the best, and the former being altruistic likewise doesn't make them any good. The Sistine Chapel. Have you ever heard of the Sistine Chapel? In case you haven't, I'll show it on screen. You know that famous painting you've seen a million times of God reaching down and touching mankind as he creates us? Yeah, that's the Sistine Chapel. It was painted from 1508 to 1512 by Michelangelo. Not the Ninja Turtle, the artist. Michelangelo, who is now world famous as one of the greatest artists of all time, hated the Sistine Chapel. In addition to it being a physically backbreaking task, he hated painting. Michelangelo had primarily been a sculptor, seeing it as a higher form of art than painting. However, depending on the source, estimates are that his compensation was anywhere from 2,000 ducats to 3,200 ducats at the time. A ducat is roughly 3.5 grams of gold. The current gold spot price as of this recording is $110 per gram. So, 3.5 grams times 2,000 to 3,200 ducats equals 7,000 to 11,200 grams of gold. 7,000 to 11,200 grams of gold times $110 per gram of gold equals $770,000 to $1.23 million. I don't know about you, but over a 4-year time period, that is a lot of money. Michelangelo even wrote a poem describing how badly he hated the painting. I'll pin the poem in the first comment below. Hear me out, but maybe one of the greatest paintings of all time came from the profit motive, not from higher ideals like artistic inspiration. There are also places where people who provide a critical service are massively underpaid. Teachers and emergency services are 2 of them. Teachers aren't very well compensated, partly because the minimum skill level needed to do the job is pretty low. Even though we would all like the most brilliant and admirable minds to shape our children. Second only to their parents, the adult authorities a child interacts with at school likely have the most impact on who that person grows into. Therefore, a good teacher is priceless. But a minimally qualified teacher is cheap. Emergency services are also low paid, at least in most jurisdictions. That's because a firefighter and a paramedic, ideally, are spending most of their time just hanging out at the rescue or fire squad, waiting for something to happen. This means that most of the time the job is relatively easy. You are literally just playing PlayStation at the squad with the boys. And then a call drops, and there's suddenly an adrenaline pumping, heart pounding, life or death situation for 1 to 2 hours. If you were to look at just the hours spent at a high intensity event, emergency services would actually look very well compensated. The fact that for most emergency services personnel, most of their time is spent just hanging around, it pulls down their compensation compared to what their importance would make you think. Now, something you might have noticed is that both of these two professions are typically government employees. We'll talk about why that is in a second, but there's another type of government employee who is also often undercompensated. Politicians. Please put your pitchforks away. I know that most politicians are rich and making tons of money by means of extracurricular activities of sometimes questionable legal or moral adequacy. However, purely looking at base salary, a U.S. congressman or senator makes $174K, the president makes $400K, a state congressman or senator for my home state of Tennessee makes $28 to $40K, and the Tennessee state governor makes $204K. I don't think that any American can honestly look at those numbers, having an idea of how doctors, lawyers, high-end salesmen, or C-suite executives get paid, and honestly say that the compensation offered to elected officials, at least above the table, matches their level of responsibility or how vital their role is. You'll notice all of the above examples were government employees. This is because, while free markets on average have far better outcomes than command economies, the profit motive sometimes falls short. This is why the most economically powerful countries on the planet, the United States and the People's Republic of China, both have mixed economies, despite both being loath to admit it. The US is not an exclusively or even overwhelmingly capitalist society, and China isn't communist. They just call themselves that. Those Chinese characteristics, in communism with Chinese characteristics, that's capitalism. All that market regulation and welfare redistribution that the US does, that's communist. All that to say, whatever is most essential or even most profitable is not always what gets paid for in free market dynamics. And there are a few scenarios in which the private sector often neglects something important that instead must be covered by the government. First, most just-in-case items aren't something that the private sector often pays for. Providing free tent shelters, food, water, and clean clothes after a hurricane isn't profitable for any one company to do in most cases, even though the best thing for human welfare is to keep some manpower and supplies set aside for those emergencies. And eventually, after the rebuild is complete, the local economy can become profitable again, because the people who live there were kept alive and they didn't have to move away. Second, there are times when the scale of the project is so big that no one private sector entity can foot the capital, or there wouldn't be enough payback to them personally if they built the infrastructure. American highways are a good example of this. While there are some toll roads, there isn't a big trucking company willing to foot the bill to build and maintain highways connecting every major US city. However, the US economy has become much richer because of how easy it is to ship things across the country. Amazon has profited from the highway system, but not enough to pay for the whole thing. And if the highways didn't already exist as a government program, then Amazon would not have made its billions in the first place. There are also some cases where the above two factors collide with each other. In the book Who is Government by Michael Lewis, a coal miner with a PhD figures out some relatively inexpensive safety procedures and equipment that would reduce the rate of injury and rate of fatality in coal mining. But there's a catch. The benefit of first developing the software needed to decide where and when to deploy those safety precautions isn't profitable enough for any one coal mining company to do that. And of course, they wouldn't share it with another company for free if they did. So after many years of dedicated public service, our PhD coal miner is able to get the software built and then get Congress to pass a regulation that forces coal mining companies to use it and install the relevant safety features. As a result, there was a huge decline in the number of coal mining injuries and fatalities per capita in the late 1900s. Third, there are also some cases where the likelihood of a payout is either low or unknown. For example, space exploration is not profitable, but we have no idea what we could find out there. The payout could be world-changing, but is also probably a big pile of nothing. A comparable case is shown in another story of Who is Government, where researching treatment for a certain brain-eating microbial wasn't financially sound because of how rare it was. But treatments have now been developed because the US government created a requirement for doctors treating it to report their treatment methods. Now, it all feeds into a big database, and from that we've developed treatments that work against the brain-eating microbe at least part of the time. In conclusion, the profit motive is imperfect. How much someone gets paid has sometimes very little to do with how important they are, and whether you are intrinsically or extrinsically motivated sometimes has very little to do with your performance. You only have one life to live. Grow it relentlessly.